Welcome back. In this tutorial, we will try to make some additional tweaks to the tables we've already created, and we will also start entering some data into these tables. Okay. While we enter data into these tables, we'll also discover some of the built-in quality constraints or integrity constraints that Access has that would help you from filling in some of this information incorrectly, or that basically you would see why we checked the referential integrity, for example. Okay, and we'll also see some of the other inbuilt quality constraints as we start entering information into these databases, into these tables. Okay, so let's start with table customer. Recall that we created this table with four field names, right? And this, as you remember, this is the data sheet view. You can see just by looking at the data sheet view that customer ID has a default value of 0. Customer city has a default value of New York, right? Now let's see if we can do some additional tweaks to customer telephone number. Okay, so to do that, I'd like you to switch back to the design view. Hopefully by now you are familiar with how to switch back and forth. So I go to the design view here. I have the same option. Okay, one thing I'm going to do is I don't really like this default value of 0. So if you want, you can remove it. Actually, I'm going to leave it in there because it might be used for something later. Okay, so let's leave the 0 in there. But usually I don't, for later purposes, for traditional database creation purposes, I don't like to have the default value of 0 in there. But for the demonstration purposes, we'll leave the 0 in there. Okay, so we have customer name, customer city, customer telephone number. So now let's see if we can make an additional modification. Recall that we have text as a data type for customer telephone number, and I asked you why you think Access might have text as an appropriate data type for customer telephone. Okay, because telephone typically tends to be numbers, right? So I hope you've had time to think about it. One of the reasons why you would want customer telephone to be a text is that you don't really want to read a long stream of numbers. It's going to be very difficult to read it, right? So typically when we write them, we have open parenthesis, the first 3 digits of a telephone number, close parenthesis, right? A space, and then the next 3 digits, then a hyphen, right? And then the last 4 digits. This is for the US context. If you also store international numbers, sometimes you may have +1 as a country code for the US. So keeping this in mind, Access figured that maybe it's a good design idea to have telephone numbers as a text rather than number, because we can actually add these additional symbols around these numbers. Okay, so to help us do that, Access has a shortcut that Access calls as input mask. So make sure that you selected customer telephone number, right? You're on this row. Okay, make sure you're here. You'd see that there's an input mask here for customer telephone number, right? So this is at the bottom here, the 3rd row at the bottom. So I'm just going to go all the way to the right here, and you see these 3 dots. So make sure that you're in the right place. You have customer telephone chosen, and you have the input mask, and you see these 3 dots. Okay, so now I'm going to click on that, and you see that Access has some default suggestions for some of these data values, some of these field names. If you have social security number, for example, it may suggest that you use this type of an input mask. Okay, the name for this is input mask. Okay, if you have zip code, Access might suggest this. Okay, you don't have to use it, but for our purposes, we are going to use an input mask for the phone number, which is the first one here. The nice thing about this is that you don't have to do anything. Just make sure that you have the right field name chosen, phone number, and keep clicking next. It just shows you something here. It just tells you how the number might look like. Don't make any changes. Just go next, and it tells you without the symbols it's going to look like this. With the symbols, the numbers is going to look like this. It's a 9-digit number. Okay, this is what the input mask means. This number is going to be 9-digit number, and when you enter these numbers, right, it will be displayed as this in this format Okay, that's what Access is telling you here. Click next, finish. That's it. It really did nothing, special here. You just went to the input mask, clicked on these 3 buttons, and chose the default option for telephone number. That's it. Okay, so you see some strange set of numbers. Don't worry about them. As long as you don't touch them, you'll be fine. Okay, so now let's save this. Okay, close this, and let's reopen table customers. Okay, so now it's time for us to start entering some information. So let's type in, let's just have, let's say, 2 customers for the time being. So I'm going to start with customer ID. I mean, you can leave it as 0, but I'd like to have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Of course, you can also have some arbitrary number, 1, 1, 7, 8, 11 would also work here. Okay, but I'm going to have 1 here, and let's say I'm going to say Jim. Okay, and from New York, telephone number. And when you choose this number, when you click here, you'd see that Access already has that input mask displayed. Okay, and go ahead and try entering some alphabets here. It's not going to let you do it. Again, by having the input mask, this is not referential integrity, but this is a different kind of quality constraint. By assigning input masks, we reduce data entry errors. Okay, so additional quality constraints that we have here. Okay, so let's type in some I mean, if you want, of course, you can type in some number, but it's got to be the numbers. It's got to have 9 digits. If not, Access will give you an error message. Okay, so now I have Jim from New York with this phone number, and I can go to the next step. Right now, let's, just for fun, okay, let's try removing the 0. Okay, and then try going to, just do a tab, or just try clicking on the customer name for the second row where you just remove the 0. Okay, see, I tried going to the next field name. It's giving me an error message. So pay close attention to this error message. You must enter a value in the table customer.custid field. Think about why that is, right? So Access is basically telling you that you cannot have a null value in this particular field. N-U-L-L, null, which means there is nothing there. You cannot have nothing in this particular field name because customer ID happens to be your primary key. Is that clear? So again, the Access, the technical term for this is null value, N-U-L-L. Okay, so you have to have something, and in this case, it's got to be a number. If not, Access will give you an error message. Okay, so now let's type in 2. Let's type in Julie. Okay, and I'm going to say, so instead of New York, let's say Julie is from Boston. Okay, so in this case, of course, you would need to basically type over the city. Okay, because the default value is New York for this. Okay, so now you have this option for telephone number, but again, it's optional. You don't have to enter information on telephone number, even though it's a good idea from a business standpoint of view to keep the database, to keep this table appropriately filled. Okay, but if you choose to, you really don't have to enter telephone number. You don't have to enter the city name. You don't even have to enter the customer name if you choose to do it. Right, the only thing Access requires you to enter is the primary key, customer ID. It cannot be a null value. Okay, it cannot have nothing there. Otherwise, you could have empty fields, empty values everywhere else on this row. Okay, so for the time being, I'm going to close the table without entering the information here. But remember, for the project, I want you to enter the information. Okay, and of course, for the business standpoint, from the business standpoint, you want to have the right information filled everywhere. Okay, so you have to fill this out for the project. But for the time being, for us, it's not that important. So I'm going to close this. Okay, so we have now a table, customer table with 2 rows. So this bank currently has 2 customers, is what I'm saying. Okay, so let's close this. Now let's turn our attention to table account. Double click and open. Change the view to design view. Right, so recall, we already created this table. We have account ID as a primary key, account type, account balance, account open date, the first time this account was opened. If you're not really clear what this means, account open date, that's why you have the description. because sometimes the designer of the database may have used labels that are not always clear. So it's always a good programming practice to enter descriptions. So I'm going to enter here, date the account was opened. Okay. Of course, it can be a lot more descriptive than this, but this is just a shorthand for me to make sure that others, as well as me, myself, I can remember this later. What does this label actually mean? Okay. All right. So now, in this case, think about what we can do with this, right? Account open date. Do you think, I asked you in the last tutorial, do you think, does it make sense here to have a default value? I hope you thought about it. Think about it. Pause the video if you haven't thought about it at this moment. What should this default value could be? Okay. It might actually be it might actually make good business sense to have the current date, the today's date, right, as the default date. Maybe because whenever a new account is being created, when you fill this out for the first time, is the time when the account is being opened. If that's the way the business works. Okay. So let's assume for the time being that it makes the most sense to have the current date as the default value. Okay. So now what would you enter here? Would you enter today's date, March 12th, 2014? Well, it might work for today, but you don't want to enter a hard number here. If there's a function there somewhere, right, that would return the current date using the computer system date, that would be the best option here. Okay. So what does that function? Is there a function there that's this current date? How does that function look like? Of course, I don't expect you to know this by memory, right? That's why you have this nice little 3 arrows at the very end on the right hand side here. So again, make sure that you've chosen account open date right here. That's the row you've selected. Come down here to the bottom, default value, right? Go to the right, you see the 3 dots, click on it. So it actually shows you an expression builder, right? That could be that could fill out an appropriate value for you here. Okay. And again, the expression is very simple, but I want you to go through this process because you might find this useful when you are doing your own Access project, a different project, not for the class. You might find it very useful to remember that there are so many options available for you through Access. Okay. So expand this functions here, click on the plus sign, you see some built-in functions, right? And you see that there are different types of categories, and obviously we are interested in date and time. It seems to have so many different things, and again, be careful, don't double click, okay? If you double click it, it's going to have something there. You don't want anything there at this point in time, so I'm going to delete it. Okay, so be careful when you navigate around. Make sure it's empty here on the top. Okay, so what does CDate mean? I'm going to say that this is really not what you need, and if you need to know what all these different functions mean, expressions mean, again, you can always use Access help as well as look at the description right here. For the time being, the function or the expression that I'm interested in is the third one right here called date, and you see here that function is date open bracket close bracket returns the current date using the system date. Okay, so I can either double click or I can press OK. So I'm going to double click, make sure the date shows up here, press OK, and now you created that function here that would return the current date. Okay, so that's great. Let's see if this works. I'm going to close this, right, save it, open table account, and now if you did that right, it should show you today's date, not 12th March 2014, because you may be doing this 2 days from now, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, I don't know when. So it should show you today's date that's there on your computer by default. You haven't done anything, okay, other than create the default value out there in the design view. Okay, so let me switch back to the design view. Okay, so we created this value, right, for the open date. Is there anything else that we want to do? Again, I mean, you can think about it. I'm not going to do any more things, but again, if you wanted an input mask, you can always go here and try to see, try to create a different kind of an input mask, but I'm not going to do it. It's up to you. Okay, So for the time, for our purposes, we've kind of played around with these different options. We haven't gone through all of the characteristics, only as we needed. Again, the help function here is your best friend. Okay, so if you have questions on any of the simple things here, use the help function to find out more information. It's there, the information is available for you. Okay, so let's close this here and let's try to enter information, some data here. Okay, again, I keep closing and opening it, of course, but you don't have to do that. You could just simply switch the view if you already have the table open. Okay, I like to keep closing the tables because for later, when I'm creating a query or other objects, it's a good idea to have everything else closed. So keep in mind, when you're working on this databases, let's say you have multiple tables, you don't want to have some of these tables open arbitrarily. So when you're working with the tables, when you're finished with them, please close them. Okay, so now account ID. If you remember, I'm just going to show you why should you remember, right? I'm just going to switch back to the datasheet view. Oops. Sorry, design view. Account ID is a text because if it's checking account, I wanted to use the prefix C. You don't have to do it, but I just do it for as a good programming practice. Okay, if it's a savings account, I'm going to say start with S. Okay, and account balance is currency, account open date is date and time, and customer ID, remember, is a number. Okay, and it's already there. It should be there already because remember in the customer table we have 2 customers already. Okay, so now I'm going to switch back to the data sheet view. So let's start. Let's say that I'm going to enter a checking account information. So I'm going to call this checking account balance. Let's say that account balance is $105. Okay, and let's say the account was opened not today. Let's say this account was opened exactly this date 2 years ago. Okay, now by default it's 0. Again, I don't like to have a default value here. I just left it there because the design view we had the default value of 0. Let's see what happens if I don't make any changes and try going to the next row. Look, pay close attention to the error message. You cannot add or change a record here because a related record is required in table customer. Think about what this error message really means. Okay, incidentally, this has something to do with the fact that you created this you check marked that referential integrity. Okay, think about it. What it's really telling you is that this is not about having a 0 there. It could be 0 as long as that customer ID exists in the customer table. But as it happened, for the customer table has only 2 customers, and they happen to have customer IDs 1 and 2. So if you enter 0, if you enter 3, if you enter 5, you are going to see this error message because the customer at the moment does not exist in the customer table. So you cannot create an account and assign this account to a customer who does not exist. Logically, it should make sense. Okay, so let's try the same thing with 3. Same error message. So it's not about 0. It's about this, not having some information. So having the customer ID present in the customer table. If the customer doesn't exist in your customer table, you cannot assign an account to that customer. Okay, so it's got to be, because there are only 1 and 2, you only have those choices here. So you can choose 1 or you can choose 2. And of course, if your customer table has 100 customers with 100 different IDs, obviously any of those customer IDs would be fine. Okay, so now I'm basically saying that there's a checking account 1, C1, checking with balance of 105, and customer ID 1 wants it. Okay, so I'm going to have saving account 1, savings account. Sorry, I clicked on the next row. That's why I saw the error message. So be careful when you work around. When you work on these tables, they're not very easy necessarily. So I'm going to make it 1,100. Okay, and I'm going to leave this today's date here, and I'm going to say this is for the customer 1 as well. Okay, checking 2. Again, remember, this can be C2, 3, 4, doesn't matter. It could be actually access won't be checking. If you actually type in X1, 2, 3, XYZ 3, 4, 5, it won't be checking. As long as it's a short text, it's going to be fine. I keep it like this because it's easier to read and it makes some sense to me from a business point of view. Okay, so C2 indicates that it should be a checking account. Okay, and let's say that this customer Julie has a lot more money than customer number 1 Jim. Let's say she has $2,000 here, and this is Julie. Again, if you enter 0, you're going to have a problem. If you enter 3, you're going to have a problem. But if you do enter 1 by mistake, Access cannot help you, because so customer number 1 exists and you made a mistake. Okay, so it can only do so much. As long as the IDs exist in the other table, it'll be okay. Don't enter 1 because it's supposed to belong to Julie. That's number 2. Okay, savings 2, and again I'm gonna actually, okay, I'll do savings 2, savings, right? And let's say that Julie has, okay, $50,000. Okay, account was created 1 year ago. Let's say in April. Again, think about this. If I actually, okay, I'm going to actually erase all of this. Try entering any value you want. If you just type in ABC and try to go to the next thing, it's going to give you an error message. Because remember, we have, we say it's a date value, right? So it's got to be date value. Okay. So I'm going to go here. It's not a date clearly, so Access is giving an error message. So I've got to enter, if I, same thing would happen. If I enter 45 February 14, I should see an error message. Let's see, because obviously the date 45 does not exist. Maybe the employee made a mistake, right? So I'm going to go back here. Instead of saying 25, employee typed in 45. Okay, all right. So it helps you. Sorry, again, this message happened because I clicked on the next row. Obviously I cannot do that because I haven't assigned this account to an appropriate customer, a valid customer. Okay, so again, if that happens to you, maybe you just click the next row by mistake. Okay, just going to type in 2, and again, like I said, as long as you type in 1 or 2, Access will not give you an error message, because those are the customers that exist at this point in time in the customer table. Okay, there you go. So you have two tables with some data with 2 customers. If you want, you can obviously add customer number 3, customer number 4 in the table customer, and also, you know, add additional information on the accounts table. Okay, for the time being, I'm going to close this. So I created 4 rows in the account table to have account information about 2 of the customers that were present. Is that clear? Okay. So now let me try something here, just to give you another example of quality content. I chose customer number 2, right, Julie. I'm going to delete the record. I'm going to try to delete the record. Okay. You should see an error message. Think about what this message means. Okay. This record cannot be deleted or changed because table account includes related records. It's again because of referential integrity that we enforce in the relationships, right? As long as you, what this means really again makes logical sense, as long as you have information about this customer in the accounts table, meaning this customer has ownership of some of those accounts. This customer right now owns 2 accounts with the balance of $2,000, I think, for checking, right? And about $20,000 for savings, right? So as long as you have those records, accounts, you cannot delete this record here in the customer table. If you really want to delete this, let's say that this customer is leaving, you've got to go to accounts table first, delete those 2 records, which means there's a business process in place to close out the records, right? You won't be doing it on the table, but maybe an application would say, okay, they close the account, I'm basically giving the money back to the customer, the bank balance goes back to 0, right, for both accounts, and then I'm deleting the accounts. And then I come back to this table, and using a process, I delete the customer information. I cannot delete the customer information before that. That's what it means here. Okay, here an example of referential integrity. Okay, makes logical sense. And again, notice the spelling is not the best spelling. Again, Access cannot check the name that you entered. It can only do so much. Maybe I even entered the name completely wrong. Maybe it should have been Kim, not Julie, right? Access is not going to tell me anything. So again, it can only do so much. So right now, this is pretty much the basics of creating a table, right? Making some changes to the attributes and entering some information in the database. That's what we've done so far. And believe it or not, this really is the hardest part of creating a database. Okay. And again, remember, we skipped the design part. That's also very hard. Designing a good database using an ER diagram, for example. We skipped that part, but we did create a database with 2 tables. This is in the previous tutorial. We defined a relationship, and in this tutorial, we added actual data, right? We filled in these tables with data. Okay, that's what we've done. This really is the most difficult part of the assignment. Okay, so you should have a pretty easy time from now on. In the next tutorial, we're going to be talking about queries. See you there.